In 2014, ISIS declared itself a caliphate, becoming the world's most infamous terrorist group and controlling nearly 1/3 of Syria and 40% of Iraq, with tens of thousands of soldiers. However, today, roughly 1 decade later, ISIS has lost most of its territory and its leader is dead. The rise and fall of ISIS was one of the defining events of the early 21st century. From its origins in Iraq after the US-led invasion to its eventual defeat in Syria, the group caused havoc and destruction across the region, drawing international attention and condemnation. But what led to its rise and what ultimately caused its downfall? To understand the rise of ISIS, we need to look at the broader context of the region. ISIS emerged as an al-Qaeda offshoot in Iraq in 2004, founded by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. The power vacuum left by the toppling of Saddam Hussein in Iraq created a fertile ground for extremism and sectarian conflict. It faded from US pressure during the 2003 invasion, but resurged in 2011 due to power vacuums that emerged in Syria and Iraq during the Arab Spring. The Syrian civil war created a similar dynamic to that of 2003, with various factions fighting for control and influence. One of the key factors in the rise of ISIS was the Syrian regime's brutal crackdown on peaceful protests in 2011, which triggered a wider conflict. As the conflict escalated, various extremist groups, including ISIS, emerged and began to gain ground. The rise of ISIS was also fueled by its effective use of social media and propaganda, which helped to attract recruits from around the world. Its extremist ideology, which combined a literal interpretation of Islamic scripture with a brutal and uncompromising approach to anyone who opposed it, made it a magnet for disaffected young men and women who felt marginalized or oppressed. ISIS wanted to create a caliphate and enforce its version of Islamic law in the territories it controlled. It used social media and propaganda to recruit new members and spread its message. Its brutal tactics, such as beheading hostages, were meant to create fear and intimidate its enemies. These tactics and a lax stance on fundamentalist Islamic philosophies also helped to attract new members to ISIS, who were perhaps turned off by the more stringent approach of al-Qaeda. Additionally, unlike typical terrorist groups, ISIS held massive territory, had tens of thousands of soldiers, and fought against military forces. In fact, oil production and smuggling were how the group made most of its money, just like a state. The US had not faced this kind of terrorism before. The focus on communications to stop single attacks like in 2001 would not work against an ever-growing state. Eventually, the US started to airstrike oil production and distribution points, treating it more like state-on-state warfare. However, the international response to ISIS was not limited to the US. A coalition of countries led by the US launched a military campaign against ISIS and provided support to local forces such as the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, who fought against the group on the ground. The international response to ISIS played a critical role in its eventual downfall. Despite the initial success of the group, it was ultimately defeated on the battlefield, losing its territorial holdings in Syria and Iraq. ISIS suffered a major defeat in the battle for Kobani in 2015, which marked the beginning of its decline. The US-led coalition conducted a campaign of airstrikes against ISIS targets in Syria and Iraq, and Kurdish and Iraqi forces launched ground offensives against ISIS strongholds. External actors such as Iran, Turkey, and Russia played a significant role in the Syrian conflict and had a direct impact on the rise and fall of ISIS. The Syrian conflict was largely viewed as a proxy war, with various regional and global powers backing different sides in the conflict. Turkey played a critical role in supporting the Syrian opposition forces, including many groups that later merged with ISIS. Turkish border towns served as a gateway for foreign fighters to enter Syria, and there were allegations that Turkey turned a blind eye to the smuggling of arms and oil by ISIS. Iran provided military and financial support to the Syrian government, which was fighting against ISIS and other opposition groups. Iran's support included the deployment of troops and the provision of military equipment, training, and financial assistance. The Iranian-backed militias such as the Lebanese Hezbollah and Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces played a significant role in defeating ISIS in many parts of Syria. Russia intervened in the Syrian conflict in 2015, backing the Syrian government and launching a military campaign against ISIS and other opposition groups. Russia's military intervention, which included airstrikes and the deployment of troops and equipment, helped turn the tide of the conflict in favour of the Syrian government and contributed to the defeat of ISIS in many parts of Syria. The involvement of external actors in the Syrian conflict had both positive and negative consequences. On one hand, the support provided by Iran and Russia was critical in defeating ISIS in many parts of Syria. On the other hand, the conflicting interests of different external actors often led to a prolongation of the conflict and the exacerbation of sectarian tensions. As ISIS began to lose territory, it shifted its focus to carrying out lone wolf attacks in other countries. One of the deadliest of these attacks occurred in Paris in November 2015, killing 130 people. In 2017, ISIS lost control of Mosul, its largest stronghold in Iraq, and in 2019, it lost its last piece of territory in Syria. The death of its leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in 2019 was a significant blow to the group too. But while the group may no longer control territory, its ideology and influence remain a threat. Moreover, the defeat of ISIS did not address the underlying conditions that led to the group's rise. Many of the factors that contributed to the group's success, such as sectarianism and the marginalization of Sunni Muslims, remain unresolved in Iraq and Syria. To this end, ISIS-K, Islamic State in the Khorasan province, has been active in the Afghanistan region, aiming to avenge the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, China. ISIS-K has been met with a response from the Afghanistan-led Taliban, however, which received significant foreign investment from China in exchange for access to oil. Combined with the ongoing conflicts in Yemen and Libya, and the political instability and economic inequality plaguing the region, there is a real risk that new extremist groups could emerge to fill the power vacuum left in the wake of ISIS's defeat.